Hey guys, got your assignment here for Monday, April 20th. Talking about a couple different things. So we talked about what markets get formed, like the market structures that get formed, right? When the government kind of stays out of our business a little bit, um, and lets the free market decide, how businesses compete and those types of things, right? So those things with the monopolies and oligopolies and those types of things. Well, when the government doesn't get involved, we do have some challenges within the economy. And we know that people try to take advantage of certain situations and things like that. So we're going to talk about why the government does get involved on some things here today. Um, First things first is an important term called an externality. Okay, and we start seeing externalities really come into play probably in the late 1800s, early 1900s with pollution. And so the government says, all right, we can't have this complete hands-off approach, right? We need to play some referee here, and we got to make sure we're not destroying our ecosystem, I guess, if you want to talk about pollution, which is the biggest externality that our society faces. Okay, so you've got your definition there. It's just a cost and a benefit that spills over. So again, just because a company pollutes doesn't mean that everybody is involved in that, right? So pollution affects everybody, and it is obviously in pollution's case a bad thing. Just kind of some examples of bad pollution is, you know, the river, the Cuyahoga River, which is in Cleveland, caught fire back in the 1950s. And obviously, that is not a good thing. Okay. And so they weren't regulating pollution very well. Bad things happened in Russia back in the mid 2000s. And anyway, I think we can all agree that that would be a very bad situation. The government should try to prevent our companies from polluting so bad that our water catches on fire, right? So that's an externality. The government tries to limit some of these things. They can fine these businesses. They can, shut businesses down, I guess, if they're not following these rules. Okay. Now, kind of explain like what is the cost that's explained. Well, if you if you want to say that we would, buy a house. Okay, so you buy a house and you live there for a while, and let's just say when you're about ready to move out of that house, right, it gets announced that a factory is going to be built across the street. Let's say it's a factory that pollutes. Okay, and again, that is going to be looked at generally as probably going to make the value of your home go down, because people don't want to live next to noisy or smelly factories, right? And so that would be an example of a negative externality, right? That cost, that homeowner has to pay that cost, so to speak. Well, they just don't get as much money back for selling their house, right? We could have positive externalities too. It's viewed as a positive if you live next to a school, for example. So maybe you buy a house and they build a school across the street from you, and that's usually looked at as increasing the value of your home in that particular case. So they can be positive. There's negative externalities, positive externalities. Okay, so not necessarily anything that's an extraordinarily difficult concept to wrap your head around. In some other cases, okay, the government's going to provide some goods. We refer to those as public goods. Okay, so for example, fire, police, right, national defense, sometimes healthcare to an extent, right? They help us pay for it, and public parks. And these are things where the government a private business may not be able to make a profit on some of this stuff. So, for example, we have the benefit in Elkhart. We're a bigger city, right? We're not very rural, but there was a story that went around back in the mid 2000s about a person in Montana who lived in a very rural place. Okay, so meaning that the population was low, and they didn't use funds to have a fire department. Okay, and the emergency response was extremely slow reaction time, because again, we can't have, you just can't afford to have emergency response systems for that few of people. They can't afford to pay for it. So anyway, somebody in the town had decided to start a volunteer fire department. Well, they needed money to do that. And so they went door to door and they kind of tried to collect some funds. And some people said, no, I'm not dumb enough to burn my own house down, so I don't want to pay for this. So they didn't necessarily get money from everybody. Well, we wouldn't have a story if one of these people that didn't pay's house burned down, right? So, or caught fire. So the emergency response, the volunteer firefighters, they show up, and the guy had not paid for it. Well, when they showed up, they did not put the fire out. In fact, they actually kept the houses next to his house wet, so they did not catch fire also. And again, the reason why the government provides most of us with that is we don't want emergency response systems to make those decisions, right? And at the same time, just like it with car insurance, right? These emergency response services are basically insurance programs, right? We don't ever want to use it, but it's nice to have an emergency response if something bad happens, right? So if car insurance, we can't get car insurance, we can't get in a car accident and say, okay, now I want car insurance. Car insurance companies wouldn't be in business. Okay, so insurances have costs. The government says, hey, listen, we'll just collect your taxes and we're going to provide most of this stuff for you. So the difference between public goods and private firms is really at the end of the day, private firms, they haven't figured out a way to get people to pay for some of these services, right? And they can't tax us. Obviously, that's not necessarily one thing they can do, and that's why the government does provide some things for us. Simple assignment for today. What I want you to do is I want you to email me, obviously, okay, an example of a negative externality in your life and also an example of a positive externality in your life. Do something different than what I have either explained or what I've put on the slide here, okay? It doesn't have to be something extraordinarily expensive. We talked about the extreme of a factory being built across the street, right? You can give an example of something. It doesn't have to be necessarily you, okay, but give an example of something that would be a negative externality and also one that would be a positive externality. Okay, so real simple, won't take you necessarily very long. Email those to me. We'll talk again on Wednesday.